Today we are here on pilgrimage in Nepal in connection with the Rongzom channel. In this episode, we find ourselves here today with Kyabje Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche in a secluded, spacious, and delightful location in the mountains. For all of us at the Rongzom channel, this is a wonderful opportunity to share a relaxed and informal conversation with Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche. This is a rare opportunity for all us listeners here at the Rongzom channel, so please take this to heart. That's the first thing I want to share. Now, my simple YouTube channel isn't particularly popular or well known, but I've named it the Rongzom channel after Rongzom Mahapandita. As Rinpoche knows very well, Rongzom, along with Longchenpa, are the charioteers of the Nyingma tradition and the Great Perfection teachings. These days, even a private individual can use the internet to share information which then naturally ends up spreading far and wide. Hence, I want to make use of the positive aspects of the internet. This is my aim in running this channel.
Thank you.
While I've been running this channel, there have been a number of people who have followed and supported it, and we've got quite a few viewers. So I'm delighted that you, Rinpoche, have generously taken the time to sit down and speak with us today. Generally, with respect to Rinpoche's activities, you oversee a monastery, a shedra, translators, and an institute with many international students studying Tibetan Buddhism, language, translation, and other subjects under Rinpoche's guidance. Similarly, Rinpoche's extensive activities likewise extend to the local people, whether it be the Tibetan people or other ethnicities from the Himalayas, the Nepalese people, the common people, and so forth. This I'm aware of. That's our main topic for today. To start with, like the 5 branches of explanation, many viewers may not be familiar with Rinpoche. So, could Rinpoche please first talk about where you're from and briefly introduce yourself?
First of all, I would like to thank you for creating this channel named after Rongzom Mahapandita. Rongzom Mahapandita is a great learned and accomplished scholar in whom I have quite a lot of faith. About me, my astrological year is a rabbit. I'm an iron rabbit. That means I'm now about 73 years old. I was born in Nachuka. My father is a Kampa from Kam, the area of Nongchen. His name was Tulku Rinpoche. And my mother, we can say, is from the area around Lhasa. Her name was Kunsong Dechen. They were good practitioners and lay practitioners. I have one relative with whom I share the same mother and father. His name is Tike Choling Rinpoche. He was recognized by the Karmapa. I was also recognized by the Karmapa, me and my younger brother both. My father, my mother, my brother, and myself, along with 3 monks who were helpers, left Tibet, fled Tibet when I was around 8 years old. First we went to Sikkim, and then later we got to know some Bhutanese. They said, come to Bhutan, so we went. In short, we actually went on a pilgrimage to start. First in India.
What year was that?
I'm not really sure, actually. I guess I was around 10 years old, so maybe that's about 1960 at that point. So we came on pilgrimage. And then the Karmapa, Rangjung Rigbe Dorje, eventually told me and my brother, Choling Rinpoche, to come to Rumtek and to study there. We received many empowerments, transmissions, and instructions at that place. I received empowerment, instructions, and transmissions from among the 5 treasuries. 4 of them I received directly from the 16th Karmapa, Rinpoche Rigbe Dorje. I met quite a lot of amazing lamas, Dujum Rinpoche, Khenpo Rinpoche. I met them many times, received empowerment, transmission, and instructions from them. I met also Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen, from whom I received instruction on entering the middle way, the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the 3 words that strike the vital point. In short, I had the opportunity to meet and receive instructions from quite a lot of learned and accomplished masters in a very non-sectarian way. Then in Nepal, we were in Nepal, and my father, who was a ngakpa, lay practitioner, had some people around him and helping. My mother said, look, we're not in our own country anymore. Let's sell my jewelry. She had some really good jewelry, turquoise, coral, and so on, which she sold, and we used this to buy some land near the Bodhanath Stupa. The Nepali term is ropani for a certain measure of land, and at that time, 1 ropani was around 4,000 Nepali rupees. We didn't have that much space at that time because we couldn't buy that much land, but then we built a monastery. And my mother and my father, the 2 of them, really helped with the actual construction of the monastery at that time. Most of the statues that were built in the monastery were built by my father because we couldn't afford to hire a statue maker, so he built them himself. We didn't have the money. My mother helped as well, working alongside the workers. At that time, to build a monastery in that way required undergoing a lot of hardship, physically, verbally, and mentally, and accepting that hardship. Then we got some monks to come to the monastery, built a shedra, a drupdra, places for study and practice. And now, when we combine the monastery in Bodha, the nunnery at Nagi Gompa, and the retreat place in Asura, altogether there are about 700 monks and about 700 nuns. They are studying in the shedra, they are practicing in the retreat places, and many of them have done 3-year retreat, 6-year retreat, 9-year retreat. That's one point. The second thing is that there are a lot of people from other countries who are interested in studying the Buddha Dharma. And without a study program, they needed some kind of actual modern educational system. They had this need to get a degree and also to get visas because they weren't able to get visas at that time. And so I really thought a lot about this and worked really hard. And the result of that is Rangchung Yeshe Institute. Khenpo says, when did that start? Rinpoche, I don't really remember exactly. Later he'll tell you the exact year. When it comes to translators, the oldest one is Eric Pemakunsong. I taught him the alphabet. We kept him in the monastery. We didn't have a lot of money, so he lived very simply, but he turned out really well. These days, there's Thomas, Catherine, Andreas, now lots of translators, and they've studied well. Rangchung Yeshe, from the beginning up until now, has had about 5,000 students total. And a lot of them have become professors.
I've heard that the Rangchung Yeshe Institute is recognized by the Nepali government as a fully accredited university.
Yes, it's true. At Rangchung Yeshe Institute, it's possible to get a BA, an MA, and even a PhD. And it's not just following a Nepali standard. We follow an international standard. We follow a standard that is accepted throughout the world, and it's a quite high standard of education. People really enjoy being able to study in a way that combines the academic and the monastic style together. Privately, I'll tell you something. I've traveled a lot around the world, and I've met a lot of professors, people who say, I'm a professor of Buddhism, but I'm not Buddhist. I don't practice the Dharma at all. And these people, many of them, they don't only know Tibetan language, they know Chinese, they know Sanskrit. Now, the level of their knowledge, how detailed that is, I don't know. But many of them do have really fancy degrees. And yet, I feel quite sad because then I hear them say, I'm not Buddhist. And so they say, yes, the Dharma is something good, but just that. It's only few people who, in that circumstance who are saying, the Dharma is something that is for practice. The result of practice is liberation and omniscience. And not only that, some people have said that in the academic system, it's not allowed to say, I'm a Buddhist. It's not allowed to even say, I practice the Dharma. And when seeing that kind of situation, I felt really sad. And I thought, well, what is going to happen to the Dharma in the future if it's like that? Is it just going to become an ordinary research object? As we know, as it is taught, on the foundation of discipline, we need to study, reflect, and apply what we learn in meditation. But people weren't practicing in that way. They weren't following that system. They weren't taking refuge. They weren't practicing meditation. And of course, the academic system is one that involves a lot of research. And on the one hand, that's really good because research is an investigation, and that's helpful. But on the other side, too much investigation. There's a Tibetan saying that says, if you investigate gold too much, it turns into copper. So I had this concern that this might happen to the Dharma, and I felt sad about that. And so I thought, I really need to create an institute of studying Buddhism. And so I created Rangjung Yeshe Institute with that kind of idea in mind. And Khenpo Rinpoche, you can ask around the world. You can ask, and you will find that these days in the universities, it has become acceptable for people to say, I'm a Buddhist practitioner. I practice meditation. I follow a Lama. That is a new tradition that is present in academic circles now. And I feel like helping to make this possible was a big service to the Buddha Dharma, and I'm really happy about this accomplishment.
That's wonderful, because I've also met a lot of people like that. I have met scholars who have, in general, a very good knowledge of Buddhism. For example, they've studied all the works of Nagarjuna and Dharmakirti. They know a lot about middle way philosophy, maybe more even than monks and lamas. But then they say, I'm not Buddhist. And without the perspective of taking refuge and confidence in the fact that there is a path that we could follow that leads to liberation and omniscience, then whatever they know is just intellectual knowledge, right? They've studied emptiness, but it just becomes some kind of object of knowledge. I don't know. To me, that's also a little bit strange. So I have a question for you. At Rangjung Yeshe Institute, you don't provide merely an intellectual approach to Buddhism, but also help them to gain conviction in the Buddhist ideas of karmic cause and effect, past and future lives, the four seals of the Dharma, and so forth. How do you do that?
Human beings, on the one side, are quite intelligent. On the other side, having a friend who is virtuous, having a spiritual teacher, is something that's extremely profound and important. And in the monastery, the Khenpos and the Lopans and the Lamas who teach the Dharma are all practitioners. And so when they teach, they start with refuge and bodhicitta, and they conclude with dedications and aspirations. And what they are teaching is the way in which the Dharma has been authentically studied, listened to, practiced, learned, and trained in India and in the snowy lands of Tibet for a long time. And when that is taught again and again in a really authentic way, what happens is that the people who are listening, their minds transform. So, for example, we say, listen, there's no obligation to prostrate before class. If you prostrate, okay. If you don't, that's fine. And at first, many of them don't. But later, we see many people say, no, I have to prostrate. I want to prostrate. It's so powerful. It's such a powerful method for reducing pride, for showing respect in the Dharma. There are so many reasons why it's really beneficial. They want to do so. They do it happily. Then they say, no, we have to recite dedications and aspirations, and they join in the recitation and so on. And so when it comes to studying the Dharma, I often say that the most important thing is to become a scholar practitioner. Because, sometimes you see in other places, in other countries in the West, for example, where people don't study very much, but they immediately want to do a 3-year retreat. And honestly, Tibetan Buddhist practice, it's without a foundation in the view of Madhyamaka and mind only, you're kind of missing the foundation for doing generation and perfection stage practice. And without that kind of foundation, then basically, you say Om Svabhavashuddha Sarvadharma Svabhavashuddho Hung. But just reciting that as empty words doesn't really help that much. And so best case scenario is to have understanding of the view of Madhyamaka, or at least some understanding of the mind-only view, and to have a sense of confidence in that. And that confidence creates a foundation, and that foundation means that when we practice the generation and perfection stage, the results of the practice can come about. And without that foundation, it's difficult. It can be difficult to get results from practice. You know, some people say, oh, I spent a lot of time in retreat, but I haven't really changed that much. You know, that happens. And so now we're not just following an academic system, but I say very often we need to become scholar practitioners. And people who are studying in this way, the students who are learning, they really are becoming not just scholars, but also Dharma practitioners.
So, for instance, there have been thousands of students from various countries who've studied under your guidance. Can you give us a rough idea of which regions they come from?
Actually, people come from all over the place to study here, from many, many different countries, places where other religions are really predominant.
Middle East.
Like some people come from Middle Eastern countries.
Middle East is Oh, the Middle East, places where there are predominantly Muslim countries.
Yes, they say something, I have heard them say,
we cannot become Buddhist, but I want to become Buddha.
Oh, they say we can't become Buddhists, but we want to become Buddhas.
Yeah, Tashi, I think take these two out, it will be better.
Oh, no, it's fine, either way.
I have something related to this that I want to tell you. I've been having some discussion with scientists. It's something that we need to do. It's something that's important. A group from Russia, a group of scientists came to have some conversation, as well as a group from the United States. I have a good translator who is very learned in the Buddha Dharma, Dr. Thomas. He's someone who has done actually quite a lot of translations. He's translated a commentary on the Mula Madhyamaka Karikas called The Ornament of Reason into English. He's translated Mipa Rinpoche's commentary on the Madhyamaka Alankara, the Speech of Delight. Among the 13 great treatises, not the ones related to Vinaya, but others, he's really translated, I think, most of them, as well as some tantras. He's very learned, and he's also a Dharma practitioner. And so we had some conversation about how to have this conversation, this discussion with scientists. And after thinking about it, I decided that the basis for the discussion should be the 4 seals of the Dharma. The Buddha said, all conditioned things are impermanent, right? That's the Buddha's own word. All defilements are suffering. All phenomena are empty and lack self. Nirvana is peace. This is what the Buddha himself said, and these we can actually examine through logical reasoning. So with respect to the first one, if what I said to them was, okay, consider the subject, all compounded phenomena. They are impermanent because they are incapable of remaining permanent at any point. They thought about this, and they said, we agree 100%. Actually, it is true that things don't remain permanent even for a moment. They don't have the chance to do so. They're actually quite good with logic, right? They're very smart. We spend a long time examining and investigating in this way, and they immediately said yes. Then I said, consider the subject all defilements. They are suffering because they have the nature of the 3 kinds of suffering. And so then we gave a little explanation on the 3 types of suffering, and they again said, yes, we agree. And so from among the 4 seals, already 2 really important points they accepted. They were able to say they absolutely agree. The third point is about emptiness and the absence of self. Consider the subject all phenomena. They're empty and devoid of self because they have no creator. And when I said that, they immediately said, yeah, that's right. We agree. And that's actually in itself quite amazing, because if you think about it, there are quite a lot of religious traditions in the world, and most of them believe that there's a creator. That's the belief, right? Accepted by most religions. But here we say there is no creator of these phenomena, and this is something actually that the group of scientists accepted. That means that they accept interdependence, right? Because there is not a single phenomenon that is not interdependent. There is not a single phenomenon which is not empty. So in short, this point as well they accepted. And then when it comes to the question of the absence of self, being devoid of self, right? not having any permanent, singular, or controlling self. This point they're still investigating and discussing. But in short, the result of that kind of discussion was that the first two of the four seals, they accepted. The third point, they also accepted. The conversation about the absence of self is still in conversation.
What about the point that nirvana is peace?
Consider the subject, nirvana. It is liberation and peace because nirvana is lasting happiness such that the waves of affliction cannot shake this peaceful liberation. So I mentioned this also to them. And this is something that they're slowly thinking about, all right? That's not something that you can immediately make a decision about. But we made this conversation and this discussion with the group of scientists on the basis of the four seals of the Dharma. And it went quite well. And if you really think about it, being able to accept emptiness, the view of emptiness and the absence of self, means that it's possible to come to the view of the middle way, or a mind only, the view of Mahamudra and the great perfection. Those kind of views, I think, really will be able to make sense to them. So that's something that all of us should be quite happy about. And, you know, sometimes I think this world these days, on the one hand, is improving. But if you check, on the other hand, we can say, like in many scriptures, it is mentioned that there are these 5 degenerations, a 5-fold degeneration. And there are many different explanations of this. But in short, we can say that this can be condensed into degenerate views and degenerate substances. When I talk about degenerate or vile substances, I'm talking about everything starting with basic pollution, environmental pollution, all the way up to and including atomic and nuclear weapons. Our earth, our water, fire, wind, even the space around us, all of these things are filled with vile, polluted substances.
Like this afternoon, when we had lunch outside in your garden. You offer some people oranges from your garden, and you mentioned that they were organic. Everyone was surprised and said, wow, they're organic. Because in the world these days, it's difficult to find such things.
Yes, there is pollution, but really the worst is atom bomb, nuclear bomb, chemical bombs. We can call all of this the degenerate substances or vile substances. And then there are vile or degenerate views. In the Buddhist time, it is said that there were 360 different wrong views, and there's a lot of texts that get into the details of those, but we can say that, in summary, there are 5 systems of views. These are the Sankhya, the Vaisheshika, the Jain, the Nyaya, and then the 5th one is the Charvaka. And this view, the view that was held by this group, is spreading in this world right now. Isn't that true? I'm always telling them, this group of scientists, that this is the case. And when I said this, actually, one of the scientists who was very learned said something quite surprising.
Did we leading to nihilism?
Do you mean in terms of the Buddhist view, or you're talking about the modern worldly view?
No, scientists. We means scientists. He said, are we leading to nihilism? This is a very sensitive topic. I can't really say yes, and I can't really say no. And he was just looking at me to see my reaction. And I just looked right back at him directly, and I didn't say anything. But he's really smart, so he got it. In short, yes, nihilism. The view of nihilism and these negative, harmful substances are filling our world right now. So who can protect from this? The scientific community, their views are causing people who are religious to lose faith in their religions. We know that this is true. We can see this happening with our own eyes. And forget about other contexts. Think about someone whose mother and father are Buddhist. But if they don't learn and study Buddhism, then they'll start to think, hey, yeah, I think the scientists are right. Isn't that true? And so for the world to have peace, to have harmony, for the world to have auspicious conditions, good situation, goodness, if we want that, then people in the world need to learn and have an understanding of the Buddha Dharma. It's actually quite sad if you look around. People are in general quite smart, and smart people look at other people and think that person's going to do something bad, and we walk around checking what other people are doing and carrying a stick and weapons that are much worse than sticks. And why do we have those weapons? Who do we use them against? It's people. Human beings carry weapons because of other people. We have chains to bind the hands and feet of other people, right? We're always checking. So on the one hand, we think like, are humans smart, clever beings, or what's going on, actually? And what the Buddha said, to use the Sanskrit terms, he talked about the 3 pitakas. He taught about Shila, discipline, samadhi, meditation, and pragya, wisdom. And as I often say, with a foundation of discipline, we need to study and reflect and bring this into experience through meditation. At the very least, it's so important for us to keep the 4 root commitments and the 5th one, which is avoiding intoxicants. Honestly, if people kept those commitments in the world, we would have peace in the whole world. We would have peace among our families. We would have peace in the world. We would be able to avoid a lot of pointless lawsuits and laws and rules and wars. The situation is actually quite sad, isn't it? I think that we live in a time when all human beings really need the knowledge of the Buddha Dharma. This is something that I'm really paying attention to. In fact, whenever I meet anyone from anywhere, I first tell them, study the Dharma, learn the Dharma. And then it is the case that if you just want to study the 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings, you don't necessarily need Tibetan. If you want to understand and study generally about the Mahayana, you don't necessarily need Tibetan. If you want to understand and study Madhyamaka and mind-only views in terms of their logic, their reasoning, scriptures, the scriptural citations, and so on in a very detailed way, you absolutely need Tibetan language. And especially if you want to learn the Vajrayana, because you need empowerment and reading transmission and instructions, right? And without Tibetan language, it's absolutely impossible. So these days I've been saying, hey, think about this for a minute. What happens if the Tibetan language starts to fade away or is lost? In English, they use a really bad word. They say if the language dies, right? So what happens if the Tibetan language were to die? A Tibetan person might say, well, our dignity would be lost. Something which is so important to our ethnicity and our culture is lost. And yes, that would be very sad for that tradition and that culture, right? It's the worst thing to lose your language, but that would not harm the whole world, would it? However, now in the world, we are at a time when the Buddhist tradition, the vast, profound Buddhist tradition, which is the unity of teachings of Sutra and Tantra, is spreading and flourishing across the whole world.
I think they're changing the tape.
These days at the Ranjung Yeshe Institute, we teach translation. And so people are learning to translate from Tibetan language into English, into Chinese. And I was thinking, there are not Tibetans studying in those classes. There are Chinese, there are Westerners, and they're really interested in the Tibetan language. Why? Well, it's not to make money, because you don't really make a lot of money by knowing Tibetan. It doesn't really help. The reason why they're doing it is because they're interested in the Buddha Dharma. They're actually that interested in the Buddha Dharma that they want to learn Tibetan. So I was thinking about this. And recently I met with a group of students, and they were all students who are learning Tibetan. And I said to them, these days Tibetans are saying, if the Tibetan language is lost, then this is a blow to our Tibetan dignity, to our dignity as Tibetan people. And yes, that's absolutely true. It is so important for a tradition and a culture for their language to be preserved. But on the other hand, in the world, this is just what happens, right? Languages spread and flourish, they decline, and then they disappear. That happens. But right now, though, we are in a time in the world where something that can help the whole world is happening. And what that is that scientists are learning about the Buddha Dharma. They feel they need to learn about the Buddha Dharma. They want to learn about the Buddha Dharma. And actually, if the whole world does learn about the Buddha Dharma, if the knowledge of Buddhist topics increases in the world, the result of that is just that the world is going to become a more peaceful place. People will be wiser, more loving and compassionate. Isn't that true? In Sanskrit, I often mention the Uttam Upaya. It's Mahakaruna, right? So that means that the most supreme method, the best among all methods, is great compassion. When it comes to wisdom, the best form of wisdom is Mahashunyata, the wisdom of great emptiness. With Tibetan Buddhism, when we study sutra. But when we practice Tantra. Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, and Yoga Niruttara Tantra, right? Or you can say Kriya, Upa, Yoga, Maha, Anu, and Ati Yoga. The foundation for all of these is Mahashunyata. Some people say, oh, I don't really want to study texts and philosophy. I want to do retreat. Well, what do they teach? What is taught in the philosophical texts? It's Mahashunyata, great emptiness. And when you practice meditation, what are you practicing? It's also Mahashunyata, great emptiness. So it's really important for us to integrate our study, reflection, and meditation. But of course, there are different ways to study, reflect, and meditate, for sure. In the Nyingma tradition, we talk about the tradition or the approach of studying and reflecting on the view, the approach of training in the pith instructions, and the approach of the transference of blessings. And when I think about it, right, the approach of studying and reflecting on the view is what happens in the Shedra, the monastic college. The approach of training in the pith instructions, well, that's when we turn our mind towards the Dharma using the 4 thoughts. When we let the Dharma become our path through the practice of the 5 practices of the Ngondro, when we let the path clarify confusion through the generation, perfection, and recitation phases, and when confusion dawns as wisdom through the practice of Mahamudra and the Great Perfection. This is what the Lama teaches, this is what the students practice, and countless beings have attained accomplishment in this way. Now, as for the tradition of the transference of blessings, right, there's examples like Indrabhuti, meaning that tradition is not non-existent. It does happen. But here, again, Tibetan language is actually very important for the preservation of the Dharma. I tell everyone this, even old people. And these days in the monastery, we have had a lot of people studying Tibetan. This year we have about 1,000 students studying the Tibetan language.
The other day I came to have an audience with you at your monastery, Rinpoche, and there was puja being held. In the back rows, there were a lot of local Nepalese who had brought their thick Tibetan pechas to practice and chant together with the monks. I was really touched by that. And they weren't ethnically Tibetan, right?
Yes, they're not ethnically Tibetan.
They were Nepali, Westerners, Tamang, various Himalayan ethnicities, people from all over.
In short, the Buddha Dharma is a jewel that is shared by the whole world.
But then the root of that preservation is in the Tibetan language.
Yes, the primary language that preserves the largest amount of it is Tibetan, but the second is actually Chinese. I'm always telling Chinese people, your people has a priceless gem, and it is the most precious heritage that you have received from your ancestors, and that is the Ta Zang Jing, the Buddhist scriptures. So you need to be able to read them. You need to learn classical Chinese. You young people should learn it. Learn that. You're so concerned with building monasteries and building stupas, making offerings and so on. Yes, this is important, but that's your second job. That's the secondary job. The most important job, I always tell Chinese people, is actually that in order to use your most precious jewel, you need to learn your own classical language. It's an inconceivably amazing language. Just put a little bit of effort into it, right? Because it has the same foundation as the modern language. So just do it. So these two are really important. I'm always telling this to Chinese people. And when it comes to Buddhist texts, actually, in terms of those that are preserved in Sanskrit, there's not so many that survive in Sanskrit. In Pali, also, it's just the 3 Pitakas, but nothing beyond that. And actually, when it comes to the Buddhist texts preserved in Sanskrit, most Sanskritists don't understand them. They understand the words, maybe, but they don't understand the meanings. This year, in the monastery, we have 700 people doing the Ngondro practice.
700 people doing the Ngondro? Where are they from?
bound.
Most are from Nepal, but actually they're from all over, all different kinds of places. And among the Nepalis, we have Bounds and Chetris, Brahmins, Chetris. We have lots of people from all over. And then there are also more than 200 people doing the three roots practice. For the Guru practice, we use Guru Rinpoche practice, the Yidam is Vajrasattva, and the Dakini practice is Tara. And they're learning the visualizations, they're being taught very clearly, the melodies, how to do everything, all of the mudras and everything. And they like it so much, actually. So many of those practitioners are saying, from now on in our life, we're going to maintain 2 practice sessions every day, or at the very least, we're going to maintain a regular daily practice, never skipping a single day. They're making that kind of promise after doing the Three Roots retreat. So that's actually quite amazing, isn't it?
There are many different lamas and many monasteries in Nepal. But why are all the different kinds of Nepali people, like the Shakyas, Bahun, Chetri, and so forth, so drawn to you in particular? I mean, of course, in general, from a Dharma perspective, we can say it's a karmic connection or a karmic disposition. And of course, this too is true. But I think it must also have something to do with your outlook and your Dharma activities, right? Where did this come from? Can you please explain this?
Well, on the one hand, my father, Tulku Rinpoche, he wasn't particularly learned. He wasn't a celibate practitioner. He was a ngakpa, a householder. But he really was a practitioner. And a lot of very important lamas said directly that he had experience and realization. They would talk about him in that way. For example, Kyabje Dudjom Rinpoche received from my father the treasure teachings of the Dzogchen Desum, the 3 sections of the Great Perfection in Tibet. And also the Karmapa received the 3 sections of the Great Perfection. It's our Choling Tersar Dzogchen Terma. There's about a single volume of that. He also received it.
Oh, they received it from him.
Yes, and so because of that, a lot of lamas said that my father was a really good practitioner. And so that's one reason. The second reason is that a lot of people received teachings on mind nature from him. You know, in the Nyima tradition, we talk about semchi, the instructions in mind nature, pointing out. A lot of people received that from my father, and then many of those people later, like when they died, they remained in Tukdam, the post-death meditation. A lot of people, after receiving that instruction from him, they really changed a lot and transformed and their character changed. They became better people. And so people heard about that happening. And as a result of that, a lot of Newars had a lot of faith in my father. And because my father isn't here anymore and I'm his oldest son, they continued to have that connection with me. But it's not just that community. There are a group of Theravada practitioners, actually, in Nepal, and they have a very good relationship with that community, with their teachers and with the monastic community, and also with the Vajracharya community. You know, in the Newar tradition, there are householder practitioners, ngakpas.
These Nepali Vajracharyas are...
They practice the new tantras, the Sarma tantras.
In addition to following the new tantras, do they actually practice the highest yoga tantra?
They are Sarma practitioners of the new tantras. A lot of their practice seems to be Kriya and Charya tantra, but there is also a Pamtingpa lineage. The lineage history is actually not totally clear, but they do the ritual practices and they do them quite well. They refer to themselves as Vajracharyas. I have a really good connection with this community. Actually, we all got together and did some events together. At one event, about 10,000 people came. They invited me. They asked me to come and join with the Theravada community and the Vajracharya community. And I went, and a representative from each one of those communities sat on either side of me. And we talked about things, right? The foundation of all of our Buddhist tradition is the 3 pitakas, the 3 baskets of the teachings. Within this, some of us practice the tantric traditions, Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, highest Yoga Tantra, and so on. In fact, now in Nepal, our Buddhist community is quite united. I want to tell you something, and this is my way of thinking. You know, sometimes people wonder, how is it that all 3 vehicles of the Dharma are the Buddha's teaching? And I'm sure there are many different ways to answer this question, but this is how I think about it. You know the verse that mentions profound, peaceful, simple, luminous, and uncompounded? that verse is the Buddha's word, right? If you accept that as the Buddha's word, it's present in the Lalita Vistara Sutra and in some other sutras. Now, whether or not Theravadins would accept that as the Buddha's word, I can't say. But if you accept that that sutra is the Buddha's word, then I think it's very clear, actually. The word profound, this is a reference to the wisdom that realizes the absence of self. In India, there were 360 different philosophical positions, as we said, but none of them taught the absence of self, the wisdom that realizes the absence of self. The first one to really teach that in a clear way is the Buddha. And then when it comes to peaceful, so peace here, this is a reference to the path of nonviolence or non-harm, ahimsa. And this is the conduct of all Buddhist practitioners, right? The Dharma is to avoid harm. That is the teaching of the thus gone ones, as taught in the 400 verses on Madhyamaka. So these 2 points I explain as the view and the conduct of the general vehicle of Buddhist teachings. And simplicity, right? Well, the teachings of Madhyamaka, or if you want to call it the perfection of wisdom, right? It comes down to freedom from the 4 extremes and the 8 conceptual complexities. Isn't that true? Right? When we talk about the view of Nagarjuna and his students, yes, there's many ways of establishing it through scripture and reasoning and logic and so on. However, the foundational view is just that, freedom from the 4 extremes and the 8 conceptual proliferations, right? And then when it comes to the final turning of the wheel of Dharma, or the final teaching, that statement, luminous and uncompounded, well, that we really find expounded just in the Tantras. It's not clearly expressed, is it, in the teachings on the perfection of wisdom and so on. And so I say that actually we can see, this shows that all of these teachings are present in the Buddha's speech.
Yes. This is also related to the teachings on the Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature, right?
Rinpoche says, yes. So when I talk about it in this way, sometimes people say, yeah, that's actually quite clear, and it's a nice way of expressing it. Right? When we talk about uncompounded and luminous, the Guhyagarbha Tantra, the Hevajra Tantras, all of these Tantras, they're just teaching about that, about luminosity, right? So anyway, this is a way that I like to talk about this. And whether this is exactly in accord with the speech of the victorious Buddhas and the scriptures of noble beings, I don't know. But think about it. Maybe investigate a little bit.
You frequently teach the Dharma to Nepalese, so I'm wondering if there are any things that are particular to the Nepalese that you're doing, like related to making monasteries or translating into Pali language and so forth. There must be things like this.
Yes. We are translating into Nepali. And there are a number of young Nepalese, many of them have studied the Dharma in Rangchung Yeshe Institute. They're students there. And they know Tibetan quite well, and so they are able to translate into Nepali. There are a number of translations that have been produced. For example, the collection of the songs of Milarepa, Milarepa's Namtar, the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, the Words of My Perfect Teacher. All these texts have been translated into Nepali.
The other day, I went to Yanglasho to see Khenpo Namdro Rinpoche's place, and the taxi driver was Buddhist. He had a copy of the Jewel Ornament of Liberation in Nepali in his car, which he would read from time to time. I thought that this was really wonderful. He's just an ordinary taxi driver, but in his taxi he has the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. And on the cover it has both Tibetan and Nepali script. I looked inside and it was translated entirely into Nepali. So this must have been translated in connection with your activities.
Yes. You know, Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen, he said to us one time, you young people, there's something that you really ought to keep in mind.
How long did you spend with him?
It was several periods of 2 to 3 months at a time. I received from him the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Madhyamaka Avatara, the 3 words that strike the vital point. Actually, I received the 3 words that strike the vital point due to my mother's kindness. I had no idea that he would teach that text, and my mother was going to receive teachings from him. And one day she said to us, to her 2 children, she said, you two come with me. And then she also brought along some of our older monks, those who had done long retreat. She said, I requested an important teaching today, and he accepted the request. And I thought, what's this all about? Anyway, we went, and the teaching that he gave was on the 3 words that strike the vital point. It took several days, maybe 4 to 5 days, and he taught it with the commentary. So I received from him also the 3 words that strike the vital point, as well as the Drikung Ngaten. And anyway, one thing that Kunu Rinpoche said to us was, practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism need to be open-minded these days. You know, he said previously, you know, every little valley had its own teacher, its own teaching. Every teacher taught their own Dharma tradition, and so on. And in Tibet, it's okay that the Buddhist tradition spread in that way. But now, in our world, all kinds of people are really interested in the Buddha Dharma. So I think it's important for you all to really be more attentive towards and pay more attention to the founder of the Buddhist teachings, who is Shakyamuni Buddha, right? Take this really seriously. These days in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, people sometimes consider Shakyamuni Buddha as less important. You know, now if you go to many monasteries, you can see the central figure in many Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. It's not Shakyamuni Buddha, right? In some of them, there's a Tibetan Lama in the middle. In some of them, there's an Indian Lama, right? An Indian Guru, meaning Guru Padmasambhava. You know who the Tibetan Lama is, right? Our tradition, he said, is a little mixed up in this way. And so this was actually when he was staying in Bodh Gaya that time. And he said, you know, people say, like, I'm a Nyingmapa, and they go around doing Chut practice. The Sakyapas and the Gelupas go around doing Vajrayogini practice, and the Kagyupas, you know, they also do their own various, you know, specific practices. Everyone doing practices specific to their tradition. What he said was, it's really important for us to focus our practice on Shakyamuni Buddha. To recite, for example, the praises to Shakyamuni Buddha. Not that many people are doing that. There are a lot of practices, ritual practices, long ones and medium-length ones and short ones connected with the 16 arhats, but people aren't spending enough time and putting enough attention towards doing that. We're not really reciting the sutras that much, right? So he said, please keep this in your heart. He also said, you know, these days a lot of people are coming to see me. And later in his life, that was really true. Really, a lot of people were coming to see him because His Holiness the Dalai Lama had received many teachings from him, and people knew about that. So there was like a big crowd coming to see him, a line of people waiting to see him later in his life. And they would come to me, he said, and they would say, I want to make a Dharma connection with you. And so he said, I would give them the Shakyamuni Buddha mantra, the Dharani mantra. And people would say, oh, so who is this deity? And he said, that's really sad, right? That's really sad. So please take this point really seriously, he told us. He said, in order for the Buddha Dharma to remain in the world for a long time, it's quite important that we make more Shakyamuni Buddha statues, that we recite the precious Kangyur, the translated words of the Buddha, again and again and again. And recite the mantra of the Buddha. It's not just the mantra of this Buddha, but of all the Buddhas. This is really important. That's something that he said. And actually, this is one of the reasons that I'm building this 1,000 Buddha temple in Lumbini. It's because of the advice, in part because of the advice that I received from my teacher.
You're making 1,000 Buddha images in Lumbini?
I already made them. They're gilded copper, 18 inches in height, and we've already completed the 1,000 statues and have gilded them already as well. The temple construction, the outer temple construction is complete, and inside there are the large statues of the Buddhas of the 3 times. These have been in the process of gilding recently, and the whole project should be completed in 5 to 6 months. The land is actually not our private land. It is a World Heritage Site. I'm offering this to the whole world. With a really vast aspiration, I'm offering this to the whole world. Because I thought about it. You know, every day, if thousands of people come on pilgrimage, there's actually not that much to see in Lumbini. And so, in general, I felt having such a temple would bring quite a lot of benefit. There's a dedication prayer from the Bodhicharya Avatara that I always use whenever I'm gathering merit or engaging in some kind of virtue. And thus by all the merit I have gained, may every being, leaving none aside, abandon all their evil ways, embracing goodness now and evermore. From bodhicitta may they never separate and constantly engage in bodhisattva's deeds. May they be accepted as disciples by the Buddhas and turn aside from what is demon's work.
The other day, when I first came to see you, we talked about the importance of teaching a basic understanding of Dharma and practice to the general population. That's basically the work that we do for them. If we don't do this, if we only focus on the monastic community, it's a danger to the Dharma, right? And as they say, every little valley has its own little king. I've been thinking a lot about this. For example, last year, and I'm just going to say this directly, if I'm wrong, I'm sure they will criticize me. But last year, in Bodh Gaya, someone made a really large offering of a throne to Sakya Gongma Rinpoche and Luding Ken Rinpoche. He was a Kampa. I'm a Kampa too, so I can understand him. He spent a lot of money to make a huge throne, and of course that's great. It's part of his gathering of merit and purification of obscurations, 100%. But his throne rivaled the height of the Buddha statue. It came up to here. I was thinking, oh no, Bodh Gaya is a place that is visited by all Buddhist practitioners. I worry about what will happen when the pilgrims see the Buddha in a lowly place next to someone's enormous personal throne. And of course, I received the Lamdre teachings from Gongma Rinpoche. He's my teacher. I don't mean to criticize him in any way. The other day, they moved this throne to his main monastery. I saw photos of this online, and that's totally appropriate. But what I'm saying is that Bodh Gaya is a place that is a common place for all Buddhists. So I feel like, in a place like that, the primary focus should be Shakyamuni Buddha, and our personal things should be secondary. I've been thinking about this. What you said about what Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen mentioned really hit home for me. I liked that a lot.
Kunu Rinpoche said that it's very important for the teachings of our compassionate teacher, Buddha Shakyamuni, to remain in this world. And he taught about certain things that are important for us to do in order for those teachings to remain, and also what signs indicate that the Buddha's teachings are declining. And one of those signs, he said, is a lack of interest in images of Shakyamuni Buddha. Fewer people making prostrations and offerings to images of Shakyamuni Buddha. Additional focus, more focus on one's personal teacher or one's personal Yidam deity, whether it's a peaceful deity, a wrathful deity, or a semi-wrathful deity. These things, he said, are one sign that the Buddha Shakyamuni's teaching is in decline in this world. And that's why he said images of Shakyamuni Buddha are so important. And also when it comes to monasteries, we have the term temple. And in order to really qualify as a temple, he said it's important for there to be the Kangyur and the Tengyur inside, the collection of the Buddha's words and the collection of the translated commentaries on those. This is the first point. The second point is about stupas. You know, these days everybody likes to build stupas and they're building them all over the place. He said that's not a good sign. And the reason is that it suggests that the activity of the Buddha's awakened body has finished, that his awakened speech activities in decline, and that all that's left is a sign of his awakened mind. So it's not so good, actually. Some of our monks went to see Tenga Rinpoche. You know, he was a very learned and accomplished master. And when it comes to mandalas and when it comes to stupas, in terms of the details of the creation of these and the measurements and all of the details of this, he's actually very, very learned. And he was explaining about that. You know, some of those things are very, very difficult. Some mandalas and stupas, you have to study for days and days and days in order to learn how to do the measurements correctly in order to construct them. And he taught that to these monks. And afterwards he said, okay, I taught it very well and very clearly. Did you get it? And they said, yes. And then he said, are people saying that they want to build stupas? And then they answered him. They said, yes, in Yomo and all kinds of places all over Nepal. And then he said, no, don't do that too much. You guys better not build too many stupas. So he is the most learned master in Nepal. He himself didn't want too many stupas built. So that means that those two lamas were very much of the same understanding with respect to this topic. Shall I tell you the third thing?
Yes.
Should I tell you?
Yeah.
The third thing?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
So people say, I'm going to hold a prayer festival, right? An aspiration prayer festival, a munlam. That had already started at that time. You shouldn't just call it a munlam, he said. Because before we get to munlam, to making aspirations, we have to go through the precious preliminary practice, which is refuge and bodhicitta. We need to go through the main part of practice, which is free from any type of reference point. And only then do we get to the conclusion, which are dedications and aspirations. He said, don't I always talk to you about practicing these three excellences? First, if you're going to make dedications and aspirations, if you're going to do munlam, you should start by reciting the Kangyur. Then later you can do the munlams. So he said again, it's a little too much. People are just spending all this time reciting the Sangchut aspiration prayer, doing this Tongshak confession prayers, and doing a lot of dedications and aspirations. It's a little bit too much, he said. And actually, if you think about it, that also makes sense. Now I'll tell you the third thing. Oh, wait, is this the fourth thing? Yeah, the fourth thing. Okay, the fourth thing is, he said, these days, look around. People are always saying, oh, I want to study text. I want to do some textual study. Not that many people are saying, I really want to do some Dharma practice, right? And he said what that is a sign that the teachings of the Buddha's scripture are spreading and flourishing. But when it comes to the heart teaching, the teaching of realization, the Dharma of realization, that's in decline. So those are the four things that he taught. The fifth one I'll tell you later.
So now I'll continue a little bit more with this question. You talked about how important it is for the Buddha Dharma to spread and flourish among ordinary people. So I'm curious what you say about that in the monastery. Why is it so important for the Dharma knowledge to be present among just ordinary people, for the Dharma to remain in the world? Why is that so important?
The monastic community is extremely important. We say that the monastic community is the foundation of the Dharma, the Sangha. But where do they come from? Well, they come actually from the general population. And who supports them? It's the general population. Take, for example, Tibet, right? We sometimes say that there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of practitioners, monks, nuns, ngakpas, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of temples, right? So who cares for those people? Who created that circumstance? It's the general population. And we have to say that the general population supporting the Dharma are extremely kind. In general, sentient beings have been our mothers and fathers, and so they're kind in that way. And in Mahayana, we talk about how the sentient beings and Buddhas are equal in their kindness. In this very life right now, for those of us who are really full-time practitioners, it is due to the help of the general population that that's even possible for us. Why is it that monks and nuns are able to stay in the monastery and study? It's because of the population who supports them. The fact that monks and nuns can study, reflect, and meditate, that they have the opportunity to gain really good Dharma understanding, why is that possible? It's due to the support of the lay community. That's what makes that possible. Now, of course, in the world, people from all kinds of places across the world support Tibetan Buddhist monks and nuns. But in the past, right, in Tibet, it was the Tibetan population that supported practitioners. And actually, when we think about the past and now, we can say that there's a difference in the way that the general population thinks. So in the past, people had a lot stronger and more stable sense of faith and conviction. They believed that past and future lives are real. They believed in karmic cause and effect. They believed there are hell realms, there are heaven realms. And now there's much less of that kind of conviction. And here, I'm not even talking about people who study philosophy or not. That's a separate category. It's actually very smart to believe in these kind of basic understandings. And these days, people who believe in those kind of things, people say that's blind faith or stupid faith, right? That's a huge mistake. People say believing in karmic cause and effect, past and future lives, believing in hell, believing in heaven, they say that's blind faith. That's a serious mistake. What is it that's really blind and really stupid to believe in? To believe that there is no karmic cause and effect, to believe that there are no past and future lives, to believe there are no heaven realms, there are no hell realms. That is really stupid. To believe that there is no benefit to doing something virtuous, to believe that there's no problem with doing something harmful, to think that you can just do whatever you want. What is more blind? What is more stupid than that? Nothing. And yet people say exactly the opposite. They say, oh, believing in those kind of things are blind. So this kind of poison is actually present in the mind of people in the modern day. And in the text, it's mentioned there are different kind of practitioners, those who are followers of faith and those who are followers of reason. And actually, following faith works. It works, but now that's really on the decline. Due to the style of education in the modern world, it's really changed a lot. People are focused so much more on the outer environment, on science, and so on. And conviction in karmic cause and effect is really on the decline.
Nihilism is on the rise.
Yes, nihilism. That's exactly what's happening right now, and we can see that happening directly. If immediately people are taught about meditating on the deity and reciting mantras, doing 100,000 recitations of the Vajraguru mantra, you should do a ngondro immediately, right? When people hear that kind of thing, they don't immediately feel a sense of faith and devotion. They don't immediately connect. So it's really more important to begin by teaching them about virtue and non-virtue. Teaching about the problems of engaging in non-virtuous actions. And then after that, mind training, right? That should be taught really well, especially impermanence. The Buddha said that contemplating the impermanence of all conditioned things is really the most important notion that you could hold in mind. You know, if you look at the practitioners of the Theravada tradition, like people in Thailand and Burma, these practitioners, they keep their discipline really well. Why is that? I've really checked a lot. And I think it's because they train in impermanence. And through their training and meditation on impermanence, their attachment to the sense pleasures declines. And they train in the unpleasant nature of the object of desire. And as a result of that meditation, the craving and lust that is felt between men and women declines. And then it's really easy to keep discipline, right? And then it's really easy to practice shamatha and vipassana. Impermanence, suffering, emptiness, and the absence of self, those are so important, these foundational teachings. And then if you just put that to the side and then immediately jump into focusing on visualizing the deity, reciting mantra, and especially when it comes to Mahamudra and the great perfection, right? People being so interested in these high views, and I really want to hear those kind of teachings, or someone else thinking, I really want to give those kind of teachings, right? We have to be careful. The Dharma is going to end up on the wrong track. Isn't that true? That's why engaging in the vehicle step by step, that's really important.
So then Rinpoche is really focusing a lot on just introducing the Dharma?
Yes, I'm introducing the Dharma. These days, I'm all about the 4 seals of the Dharma, right? I already talked about it with you, right? The 4 seals.
So these are also sometimes called the 4 seals of the pure view.
Yes.
This indicates that it's a Buddhist teaching, right? They're sometimes used to indicate this, like a list.
Yes, like a summary. We need to have this kind of summary, right? If we are not paying attention to the Buddha's own words, then that would be a little bit strange. Who is it that is the most kind to the whole world? It's actually the Buddha. Out of kindness, you completely embrace with compassion all of us defenseless beings in this degenerate age. Whatever light of the triple gem exists in this realm and time is your awakened activity. Therefore, when I supplicate from the bottom of my heart with trust and faith, only refuge, peerless and sublime, don't forget your mighty covenant of the past. Embrace me with compassion until I reach enlightenment. Think about those words. Really think about them. The Buddha is so kind, and when we really think about these seriously, isn't it the case that our hair even stands on end? You know, in the past in India, the Vajrayana was practiced more in secret, but in Tibet we have a saying, we say, it spread just like the earth and the stones everywhere. So how did that happen? It's the kindness of Guru Rinpoche. And in the Treasures of Chokyi Lingpa, there's a verse that says, I think of your kindness, precious Guru. Remember your vow and promise. Please accept me. In this dark age, I have nowhere else to turn. Regard me with kindness, Nirmanakaya of Udayana. Dispel the troubles of this dark age with your strength and ability. Confer your blessings, the great empowerment of wisdom. Increase the depth of my experience and realization. Grant me the power to benefit the teachings and beings and to attain awakening in this very lifetime. Think about those words. Think very well about that. It really helps us to develop faith, and it really helps us to remember the kindness of Guru Rinpoche. The preceptor Shantarakshita, the Acharya Guru Rinpoche, the Dharma King Trisun Detsun, these three are so important. In particular, the preceptor Shantarakshita, without him, in our time currently, if you think about what happened in the past, actually, the great Guru, Padmasambhava, his students were all of the highest capacity, and so at that time he bestowed empowerment upon them. He taught the tantras, he gave pith instructions, and many of them, countless beings, attained accomplishment. But would the lineage have lasted without Shantarakshita? Perhaps not, actually. The factor that kept the lineage alive is the preceptor Shantarakshita, so he's extremely important. Both of these are extremely important, and the root of what made this all possible is the Dharma King, Trisun Detsun. So we really need to remember all of their kindness. Therefore, the Nepalese general community... Actually, I want to say something to you, Khenpo Rinpoche. I want to say something. When we think about Tibetan Buddhism that spread in the lineages that emerged from Tibet, it did spread to other countries, to other places. Where? It spread well, and the Dharma is understood well in places where there was good knowledge of the Tibetan language. In places where Tibetan language was not understood very well, Tibetan Buddhist teachings did not spread in such a way that the Dharma is clearly understood. So, for example, if you think about Bhutan, when it comes to Bhutanese monks and nuns and lamas and just ordinary people, if they know Tibetan language, then if they want to learn the Dharma, they can learn the Dharma really well. Without Tibetan language, it's very difficult to come to understand the Dharma very well. The same thing is the case in places like Ladakh and Kashgar, Mun, Tawang, lots of different regions in Nepal, Spiti, Mongolia, and so on, lots of different places actually. In order for the Dharma to spread and flourish effectively in those places, the Tibetan Buddhist teachings, then it was important, it is essential basically, for Tibetan language to be understood. And so the problem is that what is actually really important and necessary, people tend to be not very open-minded about it, and they actually tend to be quite narrow-minded.
What do you mean narrow-minded?
I'm Sherpa. I need the Sherpa language. I'm Tamang. I need the Tamang language. The Bhutanese think that Dzongkha is so important. In Ladakh, people are concerned about just Ladakhi. Well, actually, for the understanding of the Dharma, we cannot learn it that well just through these regional languages. Now listen. Think about Canada, America, Australia. You live in Australia, right? New Zealand. What is the language that's spoken there? It's English. And people say with great confidence, we study English, we speak English, we write in English. They talk about English literature. Are they individual different countries? Yes, fine. You can have your own laws, you can have your own country. But when a language is shared, then sharing things like religion and culture and financial systems, communicating in terms of government and so on, all of those things are made very easy by having a language in common.
I also recently had this feeling very strongly. I went to Bhutan 2 or 3 months ago and had quite a bit of difficulty. Now, in general, of course, as far as politics go, a country has the right to do whatever it chooses. But these days in Bhutan, the situation for Dzongkha is like this. For the general population, if they want to study Buddhist knowledge, that is the traditional fields of learning connected with the Kangyur and the Tengyur, the teachings passed down by the preceptor, master, and king, the 5 major and minor fields of learning and so forth, they need what the Bhutanese call Dharma language, right? That's what they call the Tibetan language. You just can't really learn these things without Tibetan. Dzongkha simply doesn't suffice. I'll just share this one thing. The problem is that these days, 80 or 90% of the population is really focused on Dzongkha, which is a new form of written language without much actual use in the world. They have the Dzongkha Development Commission that is working very hard but having little effect. They also don't study their Dharma language or Tibetan language very much, so the people end up then turning to English. That's the situation these days. They have a very limited understanding of their language and culture, with the exception of some monks and lamas, of course.
Okay, so Bhutan is a Buddhist country, and in general, the general population has a lot of faith in the Dharma. The Dharma that is practiced there is Tibetan Buddhism. And Bhutan, similar to Tibet, just like I mentioned before, is a place where the Dharma spread everywhere, just like the earth and the stones. And this is due to the kindness of the Dharma kings in Bhutan. They were kind in terms of Dharma and also in terms of government. And this is what has made Bhutan a successful country and a good place. And this is something that all of us should praise. And this is something that all of us should be quite happy about. The country of Bhutan, around the time of the third king, Jigme Dorje Wangchuk, entered into the United Nations. And when they were asked, okay, well, what's your religion and what's your culture like? And, I have no choice. This is just true to say it like this. At that time, he didn't have so much faith in the Dharma. Actually, there's a lot of languages in Bhutan. Dzongkha is one among them. It's the language that's spoken in the dzongs, the cities or towns. And so when asked what is the language, the answer that was given was Dzongkha. And it's true. There was the spoken language Dzongkha, but the written language used in Bhutan was Tibetan. But then they felt like they needed to have a written Dzongkha, because that was what they said their language is. And otherwise, it looks like if their written language isn't their own, it actually comes from Tibet, then that felt uncomfortable. So they created Dzongkha as a written language for that reason. But when it comes to things that are really important to learn, like the Dharma, like the Kangyur, the translated words of the Buddha, the Tengyur, the translated commentaries on those things like grammar, spelling, poetry, astrology, medicine, in order to study all of those things, you have to know Tibetan. And you cannot study of those things without the spoken and written Tibetan language. Dzongkha actually doesn't have a technically correct, spelling, grammar, poetry. And then the situation in particular for young Bhutanese is like they feel, okay, well, I'm Bhutanese, so I want to study my language. I'm going to study Dzongkha. But then in the end, it doesn't end up taking them somewhere.
Yeah, it just doesn't really go anywhere.
So then, they turn to English. Young Bhutanese are really good at English. Actually, not really different from the English. It's great. And then some people will think, oh, he's Tibetan, right? He's biased towards the Tibetan language, and that's why he's saying it's so important to learn Tibetan. But that's not it. That's not why. It is because if you want to study the Dharma and understand it well, and especially both Sutra and Tantra, you need Tibetan. You just do. And I've talked often for that reason about the importance of the Tibetan language. A lot of foreigners, Westerners, come to study Tibetan at Rangjung Yeshe Institute.
There's a lot of Bhutanese, too. In 2019, I came, and in Rangjung Yeshe at that time, there were a lot of Bhutanese.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah, lots of Bhutanese studying in Rangjung Yeshe, studying Tibetan language, written and spoken language. I also saw them there this time when I was here. I think that's really good.
Previously, we've also had Sikkimese and Ladakhis come and study. It's actually really nice when they come to learn. And also now, Rangjung Yeshe Institute online, we have the Mula Madhyamaka Karika class being taught. It's taught in English, also, of course, Tibetan and Chinese as well. And then there's also a mind treasure from Chogyur Lingpa that's called the Triple Excellence. It's a Tara practice that has outer, inner, and secret Tara. With this as the foundation, the first excellence is a presentation of the general vehicle of the Dharma. The second excellence is a presentation of the vehicle of the perfections. And the third excellence teaches generation and perfection stage. And this is something that's also online. And all over the world these days, there are several thousand people who are practicing it every single day and becoming good practitioners. Online is pretty important. And what else? Well, in the West, I have a monastery in Russia. I have a Dharma center in Israel, and actually lots of other centers. We call them Gomde. There's 12 of them all over the world. We have place for practice, temple, and representations of awakened body, speech, mind, and students who are continually training there. And at the center in France, there's a group of about 15 students who are in a 3-year retreat right now.
I'll ask another question, Rinpoche. You have received teachings from many different lamas, one of whom is Rinpoche's own father, another Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen. But what about the other lamas you followed? Of course, in terms of being one's guru, they are all identical, yet in terms of their kindness, compassion, and activities, which lamas have influenced you the most?
Well, each lama has their own special qualities.
For example?
For example, the Karmapa. Because he had liberated himself through realization and could liberate others through his compassion, then whenever we were physically near him, generally thoughts would calm down. But especially, it was as if all negative thoughts would just kind of disappear, as if they were overwhelmed just by his presence. And even if he wasn't teaching much, it was just like my whole body would feel relaxed and at ease. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said the Karmapa has really high realization, and if you just supplicate him, that's enough. It's sure that the qualities of his awakened body, speech, and mind will enter you. And he himself would just sit with his eyes wide open, looking straight at the Karmapa. So we also did. We supplicated and prayed to him, and it would make our whole body, speech, and mind feel calm and at ease. The Karmapa had that kind of power. Kyabje Dujum Rinpoche was very similar to my father. They would just give mind nature teachings. They would just point out the nature of mind. They gave a lot of mind nature teachings, a lot of pointing out, even using similar words to do that. My father used to say unusual things like, don't hold on to something over there, don't try and draw it in over here, and don't leave it in between either. Or he would say, in the moment that you look, you see, and in the moment that you see, there's freedom. Or he would say, when you put forth effort, it hides, and when you relax at ease, you see your own natural face. If you just think a little bit about those kind of statements, it does bring a kind of ease to the mind. It's really very helpful. And Dujum Rinpoche, when he would give the pointing out instruction, he would say, just let thoughts, movements of the mind settle within their own arising. To do so is liberating into the Dharmakaya, to this Lama, who is the self-liberation of awareness, or Rigpa, I supplicate. So this would be the foundation that he would use to give teachings again and again and again. And it was really inconceivable, an inconceivably great blessing. He really had high realization. And Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyaltsen, he's the one who made me Rime, non-sectarian. Since that time, I have had faith and pure perception towards all different Dharma lineages. He really changed me in that way. And in his room, I became quite familiar with his space, and he had 3 texts always in there. One was the Treasury of Dharmadhatu. Another was the collection of spiritual songs of Milarepa. He really read that a lot, Milarepa's songs. He would read them aloud, and then he would just sit in meditation. And the Tsering, the Treasury of Dharmadhatu as well. But when he taught, he almost always based the teachings on the jewel ornament of liberation. One day he must have known what I was thinking, and he said, hey, the jewel ornament of liberation is not an unimportant text. It's an extremely important text. In the snowy land of Tibet, it is the earliest text that goes through the stages of the path and that brings together the words of the Buddhas, the citations, scriptures from the noble beings, and it is very rich in the Guru's pith instructions. It's inconceivable. You people in the Shedra, you philosophy students, you keep this text as a supplementary subject of study and not a main one. That is a big mistake, he said. He said, the jewel ornament of liberation and also the precious garland of the sublime path, pay attention to these texts. These are really inconceivable, really important. I myself practice these. This is what I practice. And this is also what I teach to others. That's what he said. And then there's Khenpo Pense.
That's my teacher.
Yes, he's your teacher. We share that. So we were receiving from him the Guhya Garba Tantra at Shechen.
He was teaching the Guhya Garba?
Yes. Guyagarba. And then later, he was invited to Lumbini for a prayer festival. And he taught the Manjushri Namasangiti, and together with the commentary. We were a lot of monks and lamas there. The Drikung Chetsang Rinpoche was there. He was an inconceivably learned, accomplished, and disciplined teacher. That's really rare. I got to know him a little bit and would go sometimes to his room. And he had these 2 things wrapped up in there. And I asked, what are those things? And one of them, he said, that's Dharma ropes. It was the Dharma ropes, like 2 different Dharma ropes that were wrapped up together. And the second was Milarepa's collection of songs, the 100,000 songs of Milarepa. And I asked Khenpo Choga about it later, and he said, yes, absolutely. That was kind of one of his main meditation practice texts, was Milarepa's song collection. Same with Kunu Lama, right? He also had always Milarepa's song collection, as well as the treasury of Dharmadhatu and the jewel ornament of liberation. Kunu Lama showed me such kindness. Also from Chokyi Rinpoche, I received parting from the 4 attachments. And before that, from Daeshung Rinpoche, the previous incarnation, I received parting from the 4 attachments in a more condensed form. From Sakya Gongma Rinpoche, I received the 13 golden dharmas. And the reason for that, we were really young. We didn't totally understand what was going on. But Tradik Rinpoche said, he's giving the 13 golden dharmas, you should go and receive them. And so due to that reason, he took us there, so we went. At that time, only Tradik Monastery and Dabsan Gompa and our monastery were around this area. We were the only 3 monasteries in the area, and so there weren't that many monks, and so actually there weren't that many people receiving those empowerments. But in any case, I did receive this from Sakya Goma Rinpoche. So these are the Sakya Lamas that I received teachings from, including Chöpke Trichin Rinpoche. And as for Gelug Lamas, I received primarily from the 2 Yongzin Lamas. I received quite a lot of guidance instructions. And also there's a very good Lama called...
Oh yeah, I've heard his name.
From him I received instructions on the 3 paths. So I've actually received quite a lot of empowerments and transmission and instructions from many, many different lamas.
What about Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche?
Oh, from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, yes, I received quite a lot of teachings. The Rinchen Terzu I received for 6 months. He gave the Choling Tersar for more than a month. I received also the Ningtig Yabshi, the empowerments and transmissions. I received from him the Triyeshe Lama several times. Yeah, I received quite a lot of empowerments and instructions and transmissions and pith instructions, oral instructions from him for over quite a long period of time. Every single year he would come to our monastery for like 3 to 4 months to teach. Anything else? In short, I met a lot of really learned and accomplished gurus. I received empowerment and transmission and instruction many, many times from them. And yet, I myself haven't been very successful. I have some regret about not really having practiced much. Calling it serving the teachings and beings, what I've actually done is a lot of construction work. And to be able to support monks and nuns, I've traveled around a lot here and there to be able to support their livelihood. On the one hand, I feel like I've been doing something that just looks like the Dharma. We might call it Dharma activity, but what it actually is just virtuous worldly activity. And I haven't really been able to bring benefit to myself through practice, I feel. About 5 or 6 years ago, I saw one Nyingma Lama. Wait, now I can't remember his name. Sokse Rinpoche. He's a student of Dujum Rinpoche, of Khyentse Lodro, and also Bomta Khenpo. He stayed with him for a really long time in Tibet, and then later he came out of Tibet. He came to our monastery, and I showed him the old representations of awakened body, speech, and mind, antiques, and he said, oh, wow, this is so nice, that's so nice, and, I think he's from an aristocratic family, so he was really praising me. He said, oh, your activity is so good, I rejoice, your monks are so good, your, Western students are so good, your translators are so good, this is so good, that's so good, all of this, right? And he was praising me so much, and I thought, okay, well, he's a really important Lama and really has really high realization, but, In Tibetan, sometimes there's like the human side and then the Lama side, and he's an aristocrat, so he must just be like flattering me. You know, I started to have some kind of doubt about that. He's being so polite, but then all of a sudden, he just pointed straight at me. And then he said, "You have received empowerment and transmission and instructions from many lamas, but if you don't take the time to do some practice, then you're not taking care to bring real benefit to yourself. And I can tell you're not somebody who's going to do a lot of recitation about this and that, a lot of meditation of this and that. Your father's kind of teaching, his style was just to point out the nature of mind. So practice just Rigpa. If you don't do that, then you're not taking the care to bring benefit to yourself, and you really must focus on that kind of practice. Get up early in the morning, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Don't see anyone for 5 or 6 hours. Do this kind of practice. Just practice like this or you're going to regret it." And then I thought to myself, oh, now that's a Lama. Now that is a Lama. That's the job, pointing out hidden faults. And so I thought, wow, he's so incredibly kind to me. I often remember that.
He's still alive?
No, he passed away in Sikkim actually recently. He was in his 90s. He was really an amazing Lama. So I met a lot of Lamas, I received a lot of teachings, and all of that sounds so good when you talk about it, but the real point is that I haven't been able to practice so well.
I'm not
trying to flatter you here, but you know, I have been here in Nepal and I came to see you a few times, and I've been around the stupa talking with my friends about the fact that I've seen you and have been talking to you and so on. All of them have said, Chokyi Rinpoche is so kind. That's what people say about you. Yes, of course you have very extensive activity. Your activity is really vast, and that's one thing, but people really talk a lot about your care and your kindness and how you're so caring and kind, even just to ordinary people and even to people that don't have any kind of connection to you. And of course, in general, lamas are kind and caring, right? But you really must be extremely kind and caring. Otherwise, people wouldn't praise you in that way. And sometimes it could be the case that even though a lama's activity is very vast and extensive, you know, it's different actually to interact with people, such they really feel kindness and care in their heart. I really admire your activities. You know, Kadampa Deshik was told by Dzomton Drowe Gompo, if you practice, you'll achieve the rainbow body. But if you build a monastery in East Katok, your lineage will remain for 1,000 years, but you won't achieve rainbow body. So he said, there's nothing wrong with not attaining the rainbow body if I benefit beings. So they say he ignored the personal benefit of attaining the rainbow body and instead established Katok Monastery. So I think it's a little bit like this. But what's important for the listeners to get from what you've been talking about is the unity of study and practice. That is the unity of the 3 spheres of renunciation, study, and work, and so forth. I believe what Rinpoche has shared is of great benefit.
All of you who are watching this Rongzom channel, from my heart, I want to say first, Tashtilek, and second, I'd like to ask you to pray for me, that in this later part of my life, I can really do some practice. In particular, all of the spiritual friends and teachers, the noble Sangha, the Ngakpas, and so on, all of you, please think of me with love in your heart and think to yourself, he's 73 years old. Most of his life, he spent his time doing childish things that just look like the Dharma. I really do feel like this, and I really do feel some regret. So please pray for me to be able to do more practice. May the teachings of the Buddha remain for a long time in the world. May the holders of the teachings, in particular Avalokiteshvara, all of the holders of the teachings, may they live long. May their awakened activity flourish and spread. And in particular, may the Sangha, the numbers of the monastic Sangha increase. That's essential, because otherwise, if there aren't monks and nuns, the Dharma will decline. Monks and nuns are extremely important, and it's extremely important that they remain and practice in a genuine way. These days, it's not so hard to find the resources to support them, like it was in the past, but it's so important that they practice well and that they are there. So all of us must practice like this, with a foundation of discipline, Listen and contemplate and bring it into experience with realization. We all need to practice like this. I do this the best that I can. Please pray for me in particular that in this later part of my life, I can practice.
Thank you.
May the teachers who are the glory of the Dharma live long. May the holders of the Dharma be present throughout the world. May the patrons of the Dharma be powerful and prosperous, and may the Dharma remain for a very long time. Thank you.